Couldn't you say, though, that the entire One of Three Will Fall storyline is just one big Christmas episode?
Oh, wow. Hello everybody, welcome to Odyssey Geek. You're listening to episode 19. Last year I didn't have a full episode to celebrate the Christmas season, but this year I do, and I got a special guest with me to help do that. Welcome back to the show, Ben Kempf. Welcome back, Ben.
Hello, thanks for inviting me back.
So, what are we going to be doing today?
I believe that we're going to be talking about the top 10 Christmas episodes. And if not, then I think I didn't prepare correctly.
Didn't you get the memo? We're going to be talking about our least favorite Odyssey episodes.
Oh dear, okay.
No, just kidding. We're going to be talking about our top 10 favorite Christmas episodes of Odyssey. And this will be interesting. We'll probably have a lot of overlap, but who knows? I don't know everything on his list, and he doesn't know everything on mine. So, without further ado, let's get started. Alright, so guest goes first. What's number 10 on your list, Ben?
Actually, before I start, do you have a prediction for an episode that's not going to be on either of our lists? I mean, obviously you know what's on your list, but do you know which episode's probably not going to be talked about today?
Probably The Day After Christmas. That's pretty universally disliked Christmas episode.
Interesting. Okay.
Oh, I'm probably gonna be shocked here, aren't I?
No, I don't know. I mean, we'll see. I just want to say, though, before I start, that I took this task very seriously. So during the past 2 weeks, I have listened to every single Christmas-themed episode.
Wow.
Even Snow Day, which has nothing to do with Christmas. But yeah, I listened to every single one. And I was surprised because in the back of my mind, I had thought, well, there's probably only like 7 or 8 good Odyssey episodes out there. But after listening to the episodes, I realized there's probably more like 14 to 15 great Odyssey episodes. So this was a difficult task. And yeah, I just want to say it was very difficult. So if there's some that are not on my list that people really like, I tried, but I think it's pretty much impossible. So anyways, I'll start. And at number 10, I have The Star Part 1 and 2.
Nice.
I think what's interesting about this episode is that I feel like it's one that I don't hear people talk about these days.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of the reason is because Back to Bethlehem kind of overshadows it. I don't think it's as quotable as Back to Bethlehem. And I don't think it's as funny or creative. But when I listen to both of them back to back, I actually think The Star ends up putting me more in the Christmas spirit by the end of the episode. And I think it's a little bit more concerned with telling me the Christmas story than Back to Bethlehem is. And you know, Back to Bethlehem is it's kind of all over the place. It seems to be more concerned with telling these other stories than it is about actually dealing with the story of the nativity. You know, it's got all these subplots with different characters and stuff. And this one, I feel like it's a lot more focused. And I think the highlight of this episode for me is the Roman soldier. I think do you remember his name?
Proclus.
Yeah. So, and I feel like he's the highlight of the episode. And especially the ending when we find out that he might actually die for his beliefs. And that that ends the episode on a very powerful note. So yeah, that's pretty much why The Star is at number 10 for me.
Interesting. Well, interesting fact about that episode, I actually heard The Star before I heard Back to Bethlehem. I think it was on the cassette tape that somebody recorded off the radio. Like, this was probably maybe 5-8 years after it first aired. Like, I wasn't sure who Benjamin was and the Zealot and all this other stuff. But I think it does stand alone on its own. It's like a sequel to it, but it's basically telling the Bible story that, kind of stops after, like, basically like Luke 2 and, like, go into, like, I can't remember if the Magi are talked about in Luke. I think it's Matthew, if not mistaken. So it's not too jarring, but it was kind of interesting going back to, I think listening to Back to Bethlehem later, I think on a cassette album that I got for album 10, and listened to that. It was a little bit different experience for me, but yeah, I would say it doesn't stick out in most people's minds quite as much, but there are some really good moments in it. Okay, so my number 10 is Caroling Caroling, the full version. Not the radio version, which really doesn't fit. And I think it's why most people don't like Caroling Caroling. Most people talk about some of their least favorite Christmas Odyssey episodes. Caroling Caroling is on there. It's because it wasn't meant to be a radio episode. It was around a 45-minute, basically an hour-long special of Odyssey. I think it was like originally like on a split tracks CD or tape, or maybe just a tape. And it was meant to be like a sing-along album, like they have for kids, like Salty and Patch the Pirate, the Donut Man, that kind of stuff. If you're one of the fortunate people that's able to hear the full version of it, there's some really great things that really make it stand out. One, we have Little Joe's Birth, which I think it's in the radio version.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
Yeah, so that's the horse we hear about in Tom for Mayor. And it's, kind of neat, it's in a stable and having a birth on Christmas Day. And then we have the Wit Christmas part, or White Christmas, where Hal Smith sings White Christmas, which is, he had such a great voice. I talk about in the Day After Christmas about his baritone voice or something like that. And I wish Odyssey had utilized Hal Smith's singing voice more. I think it's the only time we hear Wit singing. We hear him, I think, maybe whistling or humming. I think that's the only time we hear it, and that's only, I think, in the full version. It's probably one of the reasons why the full version isn't officially released, because White Christmas still being a popular song and maybe copyrights change or whatever. And then I think there's also some more dialogue with Eugene and Bernard, and I can't remember if the radio version has Bernard singing on one of the songs. I think they have seasonal felicitations on both of them. Am I correct?
I'm not sure. I don't think they have Bernard singing on the radio version, but I'm not sure about that one, actually. I'm now getting both of them confused with each other.
I've not heard the radio version near as often. I've only heard the radio version a handful of times. I've heard the full version quite a few times. But it's a really fun, it's a sleigh ride through Odyssey, and, you hear Christmas songs, and you hear some of your favorite characters singing, even though it's not, a lot. But it's a really fun episode. It's one of those episodes, too, that you can just play. You don't have to invest a whole lot of energy into listening to it. It's not much of a story. It's more a little dialogue here in between the different songs. But it's still fun. I think it deserves more credit. And I think Michael Lefevre, when we did our underrated list, I think he had it on the list. And I agree. It is very underrated. And I hope someday an official release will be made for the full version.
Yeah, I actually think I agree with your points. And I think now would be a good time for me to talk about my number 9.
Good segue.
Which is Caroling Caroling.
Nice.
So I actually hadn't heard the 40-minute extended one until recently. I like the radio one before, but I think I find this extended one much better. It has those additional scenes with Bernard and Eugene that I couldn't believe that they cut out, but I understand that they had to. There just isn't much of a story with the radio one. But that said, I just agree with what you're saying. It's a great episode that you can just play in the background when you're, working on Christmas preparations, and you don't have to think about, but it's going to put you in sort of the Christmas spirit. And I sort of feel like they should try to remake this episode. I feel like it would be fun to actually remake it with a bunch of today's characters and a bunch of new songs. Just imagine an episode with like Wit, Connie, Wilson. I'm trying to think whatever other characters they could have. But I just feel like it's one that could be kind of a tradition on Odyssey, right? Like something they do every 10 years or something like that. But yeah, I think it's a great episode, and yeah, it's definitely one that I don't think I had. Yeah, I don't think it's one that I've paid enough attention to until recent years.
Yeah, I'd definitely be down with that with the remake, and unfortunately, Will Ryan wouldn't be a part of it since he passed away
Right.
recently. But Wilson, as we've heard like in the Christmas bells and Icky and Cat and Bolting Bones, he has a great singing voice, and Andre has done some singing, and Katie's been able to get some little parts singing on Odyssey in the past too. And I'm sure there's probably other people in Odyssey, like like Jules, the Westcott Girls. That'd be so much fun. Have a Christmas musical episode. If you're listening, Odyssey team, make it happen. So number 9 on my list is BTV Redeeming the Season. This is one I hadn't heard. I don't think I ever heard it on the radio. Yeah, I didn't hear it until I got album 48. They put that one on there because they make it like 12 episodes since there's like 11 episodes that aired that season. And before, I think it was only available in like it's like a 3-cassette, 6-episode Christmas collection. I think it was called like Christmas Odyssey or an Odyssey Christmas. And it's kind of odd in its placement in album 48, but it was so cool listening to it for the first time. Like an episode I'd never heard before and a Christmas episode. It's still one of my favorite BTV episodes, probably my maybe top 3 episodes. I love the St. Nicholas story in it. This is probably the first time I've heard. Yeah, I know it's more comedic than the original story, but it was the first time I think I'd heard a lot about St. Nicholas's life. There's some really funny jokes. I love like they keep saying bishop and you hear the checkmate sound. That's just I think it's a fun running joke. I think the writing for that is so good, and Nathan Carlson's acting and that is really good as well. And Corey Burton. I love it when Eugene plays the ukulele. He gets to do that quite a bit. Get some Bernard and Eugene interactions, and we get a closing song at the end with the characters singing all together. I do have one criticism about it. I don't like in the St. Nicholas part where God tells him to go somewhere, and then Nicholas says, rats, and then God says, I heard that. I feel that's a little bit sacrilegious with that part. But beyond that, I think this episode is really fun. It's one of those chaotic madness, but it works.
Interesting. I had a feeling that this was going to be on your list. It is not on my list. I think I need to give it another listen because when I listened to it this week, I just thought it was okay. And I don't know if it. I don't know if BTV episodes are my favorite, but I think I can think of a few that I find better than this episode. So yeah, I have it. I actually ranked all of the episodes.
Oh, nice.
And so
maybe we can share that at the end. I didn't do that, but I'd be interested to hear what you did.
This one is at number 19 for me. But I'm definitely gonna give it another listen. It's not one that I found captivating, but yeah, I don't have much to say about this episode.
So the Christmas episode, you think it's just okay, or just as a BTV episode, you think it's okay?
I mean, I guess both.
Okay.
I sort of felt like it's been a few years since I had listened to it until this week, and when I just listened to it, I didn't remember much of it, but I just didn't feel like I found it as I don't think I found it that funny as other BTV episodes were. So yeah, that's my opinion of BTV redeeming the season. But I will give it another chance because you're probably right. It's probably better than probably better than I think it is.
Alrighty then. So what's number 8 for you?
Okay, at number 8 I have the Christmas bells.
I figured that would probably be on the list.
I knew this was going to be a top 10 Christmas episode as soon as I heard it. And obviously it's going to take a few years to actually know how good this episode is. Because I feel like people's opinions change throughout time. But I just feel like it has that distinct Christmassy tone. It's got like the heartwarming story. It's got that classic hymn that you can't help but sing after the episode is over. I think Wilson's acting and singing is great. I think it's just so fascinating how Wilson Knox and Longfellow are played by the same actor, and you can't tell until you look at AIO Wiki. But But yeah, I'm just stunned by that. The thing that makes me a little bit unsure whether it's even a Christmas episode is the fact that no one actually mentions it's Christmas. So it could actually take place, 3 months before Christmas or something like that. But regardless, I think it's a good episode. And I actually think that even though the ending seems out of place and sort of makes the episode not stand on its own, I think the fact that we've now heard those episodes, sort of the one of three storyline, it's now, what was the last episode in that storyline?
The Lost One Part 2.
Yeah, I think just the fact that we've now heard those episodes and we can say that it was it was a good storyline. I think it actually makes the Christmas Bells even better. Like, it's not as though like it started a storyline that sort of went nowhere and wasn't very good, because that would make this episode kind of weaker. I feel like now we can say, okay, it actually led to something really good, and therefore this episode is that I don't mind the ending as much to that episode. So yeah, I think it's a great episode. I hope that we hear more episodes that are about Christmas hymns. I'm sort of surprised that I feel that this is kind of the first one. So I wouldn't mind if we had more episodes where Wilson explains other Christmas hymns and how they were created. I think there's plenty of stories out there. I think that the Odyssey team could try to tackle.
Yeah. Well, I will say this is much more of a Christmas episode than Snow Day is, just saying.
It is, absolutely.
But I do believe it's one of the best episodes of the series overall. I reviewed it not too long ago on the podcast. But I still think the ending, even after hearing the entire storyline, I still think the episode is marred by that. By the time this comes out, it'll have aired on the radio already. So, a little bit of spoilers here if you haven't heard it yet. So, just fast forward to about 30 seconds or a minute or so. But I think the last line, or one of the last lines in The Lost One Part 2, it's a great callback, and it makes it feel that ending not quite as jarring to me, but I still think the episode could have been a lot better without that abrupt ending. Like, it could have ended after Zoe leaving pretty much, and I think the premonition Wilson had, he could have gotten in another episode that led up to it. I think that premonition thing could have been worked in a better place in a different episode outside of this, because it is such a great episode on its own. But I think the Christmas Bells, because it shows Longfellow going through all these hard things and questioning God and his sovereignty and his love and all that, which is kind of what happens to Olivia, and that kind of draws more parallels, and it seems like that's a stronger connection to it. But at the same time, yeah, it still irks me, but I can't deny how great the rest of the episode is.
Couldn't you say though that the entire one of three will fall storyline is just one big Christmas episode?
Oh wow. Well, there is Set of Watchmen that takes place during the wintertime and snow, so I guess you could... Yeah, I don't think they say how long it happened, the Christmas Bells episode happened before Higher Than Our Way, so yeah, I don't know.
Higher Than Our Ways takes place during wintertime, right?
Yeah, they go on a ski trip.
Now, do the other ones as well?
I don't remember them saying about anything cold or snowy besides, Higher Than Our Ways, which actually could be just snowy elsewhere. They could have gone somewhere that was already like an area of the country that was more snowy.
Right.
But Camp Wodana is pretty close to Odyssey. About 2 episodes later, that one does take place when it's really snowy then. So, yeah, I don't know. I guess we gotta ask Marcia Younger that.
I mean, just the fact that Wilson Knox sort of mentions the hymn in that the Lost One Part 2 sort of makes me think that, I mean, you could argue that all of those episodes is just one giant Christmas episode. Anyway, just think about it.
That's a really interesting idea. Okay, so my number 8 is one I'm pretty certain you probably don't have on your list, is Undeck the Halls. So this one is probably the most Christmassy episode Well, no, I strike that. I think Beyond Repair comes after that episode. But I think it's probably the most full on Christmas everything, which I think I really like having that feel to it. It's snow, they have Christmas music through pretty much the entire thing, and it's all related to holiday activities. And Kathy Buchanan writes really good comedy episodes. There are sometimes where that's at the expense of um, character arcs or their character traits, and sometimes it seems kind of out of place. But with the Parker family, which they're usually portrayed as being a pretty funny family. But this episode, I think they gel really well, and Grandma Lucia or Abuelita, she is so much fun, and I remember this episode. Listen to it. I laughed out loud. I don't know how many times listening to this episode. There's so many great lines, like one talking about the fruitcake, and she complains about it be like chewing on the log cabin, and David says, "I love your food, dear," talking to Ava, and she thanks him, and then Lucia says, "Kiss up." And then when they're freezing in the car and they're giving the Christmas presents, and she's like, "Oh, you're giving the Christmas presents because you don't think I'll make it through the night, or we'll make it through the night?" And they give her that quilt with the quilt or blanket with the kids' pictures on it, and they ask like, "Are you gonna share it with us?" Like, no. Like, well, we might freeze to death. We'll have the pictures to remember you by. I mean, it maybe sound kind of harsh, but it's funny. I mean, they're all pretty humorous, and actually that's kind of something I could picture my grandma saying. My grandma's pretty funny, has a good sense of humor. I think this episode probably won't age super well in the next 10 years or so, because a lot of it does revolve around technology, like cell phones and social media and that kind of stuff. But I think it is very relevant for the times. I don't think the ending's the greatest, where they like kind of go back into using technology a little bit, and they kind of brush it off like, "Oh, like didn't you learn your lesson?" But it kind of shows also like technology is, even if we only use it just a little bit, it still is a part of our lives, and it's very difficult to do stuff now without it. But I think it has a good message. There's a lot of fun lines in this. Mr. Whitaker, saves the day again, and it's pretty memorable. I like listening to it. It's just one that's just a really fun episode for me.
Wow, I'm actually surprised. I did not expect this episode to be mentioned. Actually,
Wow.
yeah, I agree. I like the message of the episode. I sort of feel like the show has kind of ignored this message. I don't think it's been strong enough in telling audiences to not. I mean, you've had episodes like Gloobers.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think if there were any others too, but I don't think it's
like the time of our lives.
Yeah. I don't think it's, aside from those episodes, I don't know if it's done enough to actually tell audiences that you're probably spending too much time on your cell phone, on your computer, watching TV. Just because I feel like they've shown a lot of their characters sort of, a big part of the show nowadays is sort of characters using technology all the time. And yeah, I wish it was a bit more consistent. I sort of missed the days where, Whit was just this strange character that didn't have a TV in his house. Right. And that was just fascinating to me. And I sort of wish that they did something else with his character, right? Like, he doesn't have TV in his house, but does he have a computer in his house? Is he signed up for Disney Plus? I want to know, has he sort of
a Thanksgiving story he talks about, because Wally Hagler and Jay ask him about that. He says he has a computer at Wits End, but doesn't have it set up to watch that kind of stuff for the same reason he doesn't have a television. So that's the last mentioned thing we've had of that. So that was consistent with his character.
Oh, okay. I don't remember that. But yeah, I just wish they were just a little bit more. I sort of wish that messaging came across a little bit more consistently. And yeah, I'm not sure this episode's my favorite. I think, like you said, there are a lot of good lines. I like episodes probably 100 times better when Whit shows up in like the last third of the episode, and you weren't expecting him. So it happened in the Lost one. It happened in the episode with uh, Grady and his father in the two-parter, right? Sort of shows up and sort of, and I like that surprise. I feel like an episode's always better when that happens.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, interesting choice. Yeah, again, not one that's on my top 10 list, but I'm very surprised that it ended up on yours.
Well, that's great. It's always fun when there's surprises on these things.
Yeah, I guess it's better than having the exact same episodes.
All right, so moving on to number 7. What's that one on your list?
Okay, so number 7, this is where I cheated. And I because I could not figure out which 10 to pick, I decided to put 2 episodes as my number 7.
Okay.
And I have a reason for it, though.
I think I might know where this is going. I'm intrigued.
Well, which episodes do you think I picked?
Snow Day and Sir Buddy's Snowy Day?
No. It is Monty's Christmas and The Reluctant Rival.
I can see that.
The reason I'm combining these 2 episodes is because I can't think about one episode without thinking of the other. They both take place during the exact same Christmas. They focus on the exact same characters. They both have that continuation of the tension between Jana and Whit. Yeah, I just feel like that's a good enough reason to combine the episodes.
I agree.
I just feel like, I mean, they are separate episodes, but in some ways they're kind of a 2-parter as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, for me, these episodes are great because it's always great to hear about Whit's family. I'm fascinated by the fact that Whit can't get along with Jana, and they have these misunderstandings and these arguments all the time. And what's great about this episode is that Whit doesn't end up solving the problem in either of these episodes. So Connie sort of solves Monty's problem, and Jenny ends up solving basically her own problem, right? And Whit doesn't solve either of the problems. And I think that's really fascinating that he can't be Mr. Whittaker to his own family. He can be sort of Mr. Whittaker, the guy who solves everybody's problems, but he can't solve, he can't solve his grandchildren's problem because there's someone in the way, right? There's Jana. And I think that's really interesting about those episodes. And I don't think we get any more of these sort of like Whit family Christmas episodes after this, right? I think that's the last we hear of it. Am I right?
If you count Silent Night.
No, yeah, I mean like with his whole family, like with his grandchildren, right? That's the end, right?
Yeah, there's only mentions of it, but I don't think we ever hear it.
Right. So, I think they're great. I think Monty's Christmas is probably the most talked about out of the 2. The one that I see most on people's favorite Christmas episodes. But I think The Reluctant Rival is really good as well. I think it's in some ways a sad episode because Jenny basically didn't do anything wrong. She was basically just good at the violin, right? And so as a result, the other kids are upset. Whit and Jana are bickering again, and it just creates this huge mess. And she just decides, I'm just gonna, fail, right? And everything can go back to normal. So I think it's an underrated episode, but both of the episodes are really good.
Yeah, I probably hear Monty's Christmas more than I do The Reluctant Rival, because for that one too, it's almost like it's almost a Christmas episode, kind of. I mean, it's not, like how I categorize a Christmas episode takes place at Christmas or Christmas time and has very strong Christmas themes in it or events. But for some reason, that episode doesn't really click as much as being a part of that. And also, it's one of the Christmas episodes I don't own, so I only listen to it in the club. So I have to like seek it out to listen to it a little bit more. But yeah, that's an episode there too that it's not a perfect happy ending, a regular Christmas episode. It's one that it's one that's ending like kind of like a glass darkly. Like you don't really want it to end that way. You kind of see how it would. It's not a perfect ending, but you can see how that happens, and it's a reflection of real life. Life isn't always a happy ending for every situation.
Yeah, and I think what's great about the Reluctant Rival is that it sort of reminds me of Christmas when I was young. Like we'd go on these like long family trips and to visit family, and when you're gone on these trips, you'd stop at like a church you've never been to before, and you're sort of the outsider. And when you're the outsider as a kid, all the people in the church, the grown-ups, are all really friendly and they're nice, and they'll give you a present or something like that, and they'll make you feel really welcome and your whole family welcome. But then the other kids, they're not as welcoming. They're sort of like, who is this new person? Who is this new kid? And I think the Reluctant Rival just really captures that feeling of just being an outsider during Christmas time, when you're meeting and visiting all these new people, and sometimes people are welcoming, and then sometimes they're just not, because they don't know who you are. And yeah, so I think it's a really really interesting episode.
That's a really good argument for this to be a two-parter, because there are stuff like we just talked about, like the 1 or 3 or fall thing. A lot of those episodes could be considered, 1, 2, 3, 4-parter or whatever. So number 7 for me is another not very well known Christmas episode, and that is Christmas Around the World. And if it's the radio version, it's a 2-parter, but originally it was just like a full length thing, like about 40 some minutes. And this one was a happy accident. I first listened to this episode. We were in a Goodwill store, and I think my mom or my dad found a tape. It didn't have the cover. It didn't have like the case for it. Just the cassette tape. It said "Adventures in Odyssey, Joy to the World" on it. And they showed it to me, and I looked at it like, wait, like this doesn't sound a whole lot familiar to me. But it had Adventures in Odyssey on it. I might have heard a little bit about it. I can't remember if I looked it up like on my phone or something about an AIO Wiki. I can't remember if I had a smartphone then or not. But I took it home, I listened to it, and like I'd never heard it before, and I loved it. And I still love it today. I think it's better than Caroling is, because it's a little bit more of a story. At least the songs are tied together a little bit more. It has the Imagination Station. They're going through these different periods of history in different countries to see where these songs came from. And I love all those little known facts, like where these songs originated. I think when I first heard it, a lot of those songs I didn't know they came from these different countries. And it's a really fun history lesson. And it's also the first and only time that Tom Riley ever goes on Imagination Station adventure. And it's kind of interesting. He doesn't seem perplexed or like surprised at all the stuff happening. I mean, him and Eugene are kind of like the guide. And I think this was recorded after Hal Smith died, and they used like some of his of Hal Smith's lines from, I think, The Mortal Coil and A Time for Christmas at the beginning. Tom is a little bit out of character, because I seem like he would be more awed and inspired, or just like this machine goes around too fast or something like that. You think he would probably say that? He does say in character when he's like, he's talking to Eugene, like, you don't need to complicate things or that kind of stuff. That's still there. But I like the songs a lot more in this because it's a little more variety. Caroling has more of the traditional, I guess being more American, I guess, or the more, I'm not sure what you call it, the more, like, with White Christmas, and can't think of all the songs off the top of my head, but this one has, a little more variety. Some of the songs that aren't as well known as Christmas songs, especially probably to some kids, like O Come, Emmanuel, and some other ones too. I think this is a lot better than Caroling, and it's, overall it's just really fun to listen to, and it's great to learn a lot of new stuff in it.
Yeah, another surprising choice that I was not expecting. I heard this for the first time recently, and I think the songs are good. I listened to it at the same time that I listened to Caroling, the sort of extended one, and I preferred Caroling.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think I have to listen to this one again, but I think my reaction was that I really like Caroling, and I thought Christmas Around the World was okay, and I wonder if it's because I felt like I wasn't hearing enough from the characters who were on the Imagination Station adventure.
I could see that.
Yeah, and then I got confused at the end So I have to give it another listen because I've only heard it once. I got confused because they suddenly sort of visit Dale
Yeah,
Jacobs, right? Is that what happens?
I think it's that or George Barkley. No, I think Dale's in Caroling, and then George is in Christmas Around the World.
Okay, it was one of them, and I got confused all of a sudden because they were visiting this character who was in Odyssey, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I got confused, and I thought I missed something because I thought all of a sudden the Imagination Station venture had ended, and they decide we're gonna go visit George Barkley or Dale Jacobs, one of them. I'm getting them mixed up, and then I was confused, and then at the end I found out they were still in the Imagination Station, so they lost me for a second there.
Yeah, it is very confusing. Like reality and virtual reality bends or mixes up too much there.
But yeah, I thought it was interesting too that Tom was in the Imagination Station, and I sort of had that thought. Wait a second, is this the only time? Was there, how many other times was he in the Imagination Station? And I sort of thought about that, and then I couldn't think of any other episodes except for the episode Exit, where he didn't exactly go on an Imagination Station journey or adventure, but I like to think that the episode Exit was his only time actually inside of the Imagination Station. I think that makes it even funnier that he knew absolutely nothing about the Imagination Station and that he was basically asked to like save the entire world. I think there's something funny about that. So it was really interesting hearing this episode, though. I think it's obviously this is an episode that's really tough to find these days. So I really appreciate hearing this sort of like, hearing these characters basically say these lines I've never heard before. But yeah, great songs though, and obviously different songs than Caroling.
Yeah, there's a little bit of overlap, but I think this one has more different ones than Caroling has. But most of them, I think I like these versions of the songs from Caroling better. And it's interesting too that after I think the tape and CD split tracks thing came out, they later did it as a two-parter for the radio, but they had the episodes as the episodes coming after It's a Wrap and before For Whom the Wedding Bells Toll Part 1. And it's interesting because one that has Hal Smith's wit in it and has Erica and Sam in it, and especially Sam because his voice changed quite a bit in It's a Wrap, and you hear this, if you heard it in order, then you'd hear him back to like, a few years ago with his voice.
Right. And I don't think Erica had been on the show for a long time, right?
Yeah, I think she was in album 26 in WORRY. I think that was her last episode, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. Yeah, I'm not sure because I believe AIO Wiki is not working at the moment, right?
Yeah, it's been like that for a couple days.
Yeah, so we can't actually confirm any of these things we're saying.
All right, so what's number 6 on your list?
Okay, so I have A Time for Christmas. I actually have a difficult time explaining why I like this episode. But for me, it's the combination of this very specific Christmas tone of the show. Has a very sort of like unique tone and sort of the immersive sound design of like the Imagination Station scenes. And the fact that this Imagination Station venture feels different because the characters are sort of eavesdropping on these different times instead of actually interacting with the characters within the Imagination Station. And I sort of feel like, I wonder if that sort of eavesdropping element makes the scenes a little bit more immersive or authentic or something like that. I like the overall message of the episode that like you can't help the people in the past, or that you can't help the people who have suffered in the past, but you can actually help the people in the present. I like the ending. I like Wit sort of tricking people into thinking they've left the Imagination Station, but they haven't.
Back when it wasn't questionable,
right? And I guess he sort of did the opposite with the Perkins, right? They thought they were in the Imagination Station, but then they weren't. And Always Home, right? Yeah. So they sort of did the opposite for that. But I always think it's interesting when he does that. And always maybe my top. I don't know. Maybe my top 25 moments in Odyssey is that moment in the episode when there's like this glitch in the imagination station where all of a sudden people can hear Courtney yelling at them.
Oh yeah, that is a memorable moment.
And everyone stops and is like confused, and the audience is confused, and Wit acts confused, and they think it's a demon. And to this day, I can't tell if Wit had planned this as being part of the adventure. I don't know, and they never explain it. And I think it's just an amazing sort of moment that's like you're never gonna know, and it's just this really interesting part of Wit's history. I like this episode quite a bit. I think it's very underrated. I don't think enough people talk about it, but it's definitely one of my favorites.
For this episode, I don't know. I when it first came out, it probably wouldn't be as cliche as it is now. Like the kind of person's so busy with everything and they forget the meaning of Christmas and that kind of stuff. So to me, I this episode haven't heard a whole lot. I think I might have heard it once or twice on the radio. Didn't own this episode for quite a while, but I'm thinking it seemed like it's a off-due storyline, and it seems I don't know. I mean, let's see, is it Courtney in this episode?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it is.
Okay, yeah, I don't know. I think she had some better episodes. I think like her first episode that she was introduced is really good, but for this one, I think the actress that plays her, I don't know. I felt that there could have been. I don't think her acting was the greatest. I think if she had a little bit more emotion in her voice for some of those scenes, I think it probably would work a little bit better. I don't know. I mean, just because it's different, as like you said with the the eavesdropping like on the people and events, that kind of stuff is different. I mean, they do that I think in future episodes. For me, I don't know. It just felt like, I've kind of heard this kind of story before. I mean, again, it's about 20 plus years old now, so when it was then, it'd probably be a little bit more fresh. But for me, it's probably one of my least favorite Christmas episodes.
Interesting.
But there are some good moments in it. And actually, I think this episode, Paul McCusker wrote it. I think he adapted it from one of his stage plays, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm interested to see what that original stage play was about.
Interesting. Well, you should give it another chance.
Okay, I'll try to listen to that one soon. Okay, so number 6 on my list is The Visitors.
Interesting.
So this one, I have a unique history with it. This was probably one of the most listened to Christmas episodes in my family, or at least one that I listened to, because I remember years ago, back when family Christian stores were still open, I think my parents got me that episode. It's one of those 99-cent sampler tapes with a picture of like Whit, Connie, and Eugene on the cover. And I never heard it. I don't think I'd ever heard it on the radio before. And it was such a unique episode, and I don't think I understood even like the ending very much until much later. I think I had kind of a little bit of an epiphany with that episode. I'm not sure how many years back it was. Angels were in Odyssey before Malachi. So they don't say it explicitly in this episode, but it's kind of inferred that these probably were angels. And this happens before Malachi's message. I can't remember who wrote this episode. Probably Paul McCusker, I would think. But I think it's such a great twist on the story, and it acts kind of like of a sequel to Peace on Earth, which actually isn't on my list. I think this one's better, but they do mention like how people are so nice to them and did all this stuff for them. And I like that contrast, like usually like when people, and I'm talking about myself too, like when we're in a situation like that, things are taken away from us, or things are harder, and you like someone does something nice for you, but when you're back to like normal, then we can tend to forget that we can help someone else out too. People have done so much for us. Like as humans, we tend to forget on that kind of stuff, and it's kind of like I guess almost like a Thanksgiving message too. We should give thanks all year long, not just at Thanksgiving kind of thing. But I think it's such a great message in the story about helping others, sacrificing some of your time, some of your money to help someone out when you feel that need. And when we all need to be in tune with God so we can discern his will, so when God's giving us a nudge to do something, that we follow it. I don't know, I like the music in this is really good too. I like it, and the acting from everybody. I especially like that scene where they're reading the Christmas story, and they had this kind of like pause, and they're all thinking the same thing. It's a great. I think it's a great moment in that, and the twist. I as a kid it was a little bit hard for me to understand a little bit, but I've appreciated this episode quite a bit more since then. I think it's probably one of the best Barkley family episodes, and also one of their best Christmas episodes.
Interesting. I like the episode. I think the angel's explanation is interesting. I've never thought about it like that. No, I think that's really interesting. Yeah, I think it's a solid Barkley Christmas episode. What's interesting about this episode is that I met someone one day who used to listen to Odyssey, and we ended up talking about Odyssey a bunch. And throughout our conversation, he told me that he had 2 least favorite Odyssey episodes. And so I asked him, "Oh, which episodes are those?" And he said one was Whatever Happened to the Silver Streak, because he believed that the episode was sort of teaching kids that your initial suspicions and biases about people are usually correct. And I was like, okay, I don't totally agree with that, but I can see that. I can see how you could argue that. Because as you know, if you remember the ending to that episode,
it's not a very happy ending.
The person who they suspect is the person who actually took the silver streak, right? And then the other episode was The Visitors. And he said that he felt like the message of the episode was that even if you don't help someone, that's okay, because there's always going to be someone else in the future that you can help.
That one, I think, is weaker than the first explanation.
Well, he sort of felt, and the thing is, I don't totally agree with him, but I can kind of see that. Both the Barkleys and the writer seem to replace this first family very easily, right? So like we never know if they're okay, and that's kind of strange. And after they find the new family, it's like, okay, we can stop looking for the old family. And now your explanation that it was angels and they were led to this place, and it's kind of interesting, and it kind of makes sense because maybe that's what George was thinking too. Like this first family led us to who we were supposed to help. And so there's something kind of, it's sort of what you were saying at the beginning, which I think you sort of admitted at the beginning. There was something sort of confusing about the messaging in this one, right? Like that you couldn't quite figure out. And I think that's where I'm at with the episodes, that I like it a lot, but there's something that just doesn't quite work. And I also think that the Barkleys were way too hard on themselves. I think that I probably would have done the same thing. And the fact that their response to this family was, let's call Whit so that they can basically, so that Whit can help. And the fact that Whit basically said, okay, I'll help. I have this spare room that they can stay in. I think that's a perfectly reasonable thing that most other people in that situation, if they basically found a family abandoned, I think it's perfectly reasonable to call Whit and say, hey, are you able to help out with this situation? You know what I mean? And I think they were kind of selfish in some ways. I don't think they had the right attitude, but I think in some ways that's a perfectly reasonable thing to do because they didn't know these people, right? They were strangers, and so calling someone like Whit, I think is perfectly fine. So there's always that part of the episode where I think the Barkleys were a little bit too tough on themselves. I think it's okay to ask Whit for help with this situation. So that said, I think it's a great Christmas episode.
Mm-hmm. I think, well, the thing is, I think they first call him because he knows about the different charities and organizations that can help him out. And it turns out none of those people, like those places I think are full or something, or he couldn't get someone for the next day. So he had to have them in his house, which wasn't the original intention of the Barkleys. I would think that maybe they probably would feel bad about, oh, okay, wow, now he has them in his house, and he's by himself too. Like I think I only have kids to think about, but I think a stranger, like a strange family like that, with a person that's all by themselves, that's also elderly, is a little more dangerous maybe than to adults and kids that are fairly mature in their emotions and their thinking processes. So I'm thinking because they seem kind of dismissive of that part, like, oh, well, that's good. He has a place for him. I think that right there, I think that part they probably should like, oh, wow, I hope he's okay or something like that. I think if they did something like that, I think it might have helped things a little bit. But yeah, I never thought too much about the episode like that.
They were definitely, at the end of the day, they were definitely just not wanting to deal with the situation, right? Like that part is true. They just wanted to have a nice Christmas and they didn't want to have their Christmas ruined. And I think that part is they were definitely in the wrong in that sense. It's just all these details of the episode that are a little bit confusing but again, it's a solid Christmas episode.
All right, so we're at the halfway point now. So what's number 5 on your list?
At number 5, I have the episode "Where's Your Daddy?" And this is an episode that I hadn't heard in quite a few years, and that I just revisited for the first time recently. And when I finished re-listening to it, I thought, okay, this is got to be one of the most underrated episodes on Odyssey. And I think part of the reason I like it is that, whereas a lot of other Christmas episodes start off with having our main characters bickering with each other or being caught up with the business of Christmas, I like how this episode depicts all of our characters. So like Connie, Whit, Tom as being completely good and caring people. Whit sees someone sitting out in the cold and helps them. Tom is helping out at the prison. Connie sort of helps Brooke out with her problems at home. Every main character is at their best. And you don't always see that, right? Like all these other Christmas episodes, usually Connie and Eugene are just at their worst, right? Like just arguing and bickering all the time. And I think there's just sort of a nice feeling there that they're just being really nice. Yeah, I just think it's a simple episode. I feel like the writers saw that there was this issue going on at the time, that maybe not enough was being done for families who have parents in prison, and they sort of saw that it was an issue, and you get the sense that they saw it was an important issue and felt the need to address it. And so I think it's a solid episode. It's very, very heartwarming. And what's interesting about this episode, and I don't know if you're going to end up talking about this episode or Beyond Repair, but it's interesting to compare this episode to Beyond Repair, because I feel like it's an example of an episode where less is more. So like in Beyond Repair, which is a very similar episode, which also deals with a parent who's in prison, they've got all these flashbacks to the father, and flashbacks telling the audience how terrible of a dad he was, right? And this is an episode where you never even hear the father. All you hear is this letter that someone reads, and at the end of the episode, you sort of forget that you've never heard the father's voice, but he feels like a real person at the end of it, and it's a very emotional, effective moment. So it just goes to show, like, a simple letter is more effective than maybe a flashback is. So I think it's a great episode, and I had kind of forgotten about it, and it's definitely one I think that I would add to like a top 100 episodes list. So, what do you think of this episode?
Yeah, this actually isn't on my list, but it's not because I don't think it's a good episode. I think it's really good, and I agree it is underrated. It's just not one of my favorites. I think there's some really great moments in it, and like when this emotional part, where Brooke breaks down crying, like, yeah, go out and tell everybody my daddy's in jail. And probably my favorite scene in it is where Tom Riley's holding those gifts or whatever, and Eric comes up. I love that scene, kind of like Tom being kind of sneaky, kind of like Whit does.
That's a great Tom Riley scene. That's an amazing scene, and there's so many amazing scenes, just one after the other, that you don't need much conflict. You just need scenes where people are being nice to somebody else, and that can create just this, amazing emotional scene, right? Sorry, go ahead. I interrupted you.
Oh no, that's a great point. And actually, I just now thought of this. Wit and Tom actually do sing a little bit in this one. I think they sing Jingle Bells a little bit, don't they? It's been a while since I've heard this one.
I forget. There's been a few episodes where they suddenly start singing, so I I forget which ones.
I think it's right before a scene transition, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's when they're getting ready to close up or something.
Maybe.
But yeah. So I guess we hear Wit singing there a little bit. But yeah, this is very emotional. I think it's very well written, and it seems like because the Beyond Repair was a club episode, and their organization that they had was Angel Tree, and they do it in this one. But I think this one, I don't know. It seems like, I mean, it's about balance, but I think both are about the same. And because some club episodes can have a little more emphasis on those ministries, and some just less. Kind of like how a Teach a Man was, they're like very minimal, or like the Martyr and the Rooster. And then like major ones like with I guess like the launch and that kind of stuff. But I think they balance both Beyond Repair and this episode with that. And I think it gives you good different perspectives of people that have family members in jail. And yeah, this episode, I think the last time I heard it, I think it made me tear up some. It is a good episode. It's just not one of my favorites. But yeah, I think it deserves some more recognition. So number 5 on my list is Unto Us a Child is Born. And I can't really think of anything bad to say about this episode. Pretty much all the episodes after this, I think they're probably near perfect. But this episode, I think they have one of the best mixtures of funny and heartwarming storytelling in it. And also some really great character development. This episode usually is not aired at Christmas time. It's usually aired along with the normal daily schedule. I guess because it is so closely tied to, the Eugene and Katrina thing. Which I guess some people might compare it to like the Christmas bells, but I think this one works enough that we don't necessarily have to know everything that comes before and after with Eugene and Katrina to understand everything. With like the Christmas bells, like, wait, what happens next? Which I think like with this episode, like, where Eugene calls out, Katrina, wait, and then he like whispers like, I love you. That's a great moment. Even if you don't know what happens afterward, that's such a sweet moment that you could, kind of wraps things up kind of with a bow a little bit. Kind of ends, like with Mary Barkley being, or giving birth to Stuart. I love their transition. It's just so much fun hearing like the radio broadcast and, doing live radio. And then I love the cuts from the different scenes from like the radio show to the hospital and back and forth. I love that. The music is really good. And I think it's the only Christmas episode that we have with Jack in it, with Jack Allen and Jason until the Christmas bells. So it's nice to have them as part of the Christmas festivities in Odyssey. And it's just a fun episode, especially for people that listen to the show for so long. With the Barkleys, having a new baby, and then Eugene and Katrina, kind of something, you feel they're drawing closer together. It's just such a great episode. That's why it's on my number. That's why it's at number 5 for me.
Yeah, I agree, and I think you've mentioned all the points I could have said about this episode. The ending is just so strong, right? Like you mentioned, it's just sort of one scene after the other. Mary goes into labor on air. Then Jimmy tries to figure out the sound effects. Then Eugene and Katrina play Mary and Joseph, and that's kind of a funny moment because he accidentally almost says Katrina's name.
Yeah.
And then you find out the name of the baby after Stuart's born, and then sort of Eugene runs after Katrina. It's like, I don't know how many minutes that is, but that's like 10 minutes of just the best that Odyssey has to offer, right? So yeah, one of the strongest Odyssey endings, I think. And yeah, I also noted that it's pretty sad that there was only one Jack Allen Christmas episode.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of strange to think about, because if there was someone whose voice just suited sort of the Christmas, holiday or something like that, like it would have been his voice, right? Like it just, it's just funny to think he could have been in a bunch of Christmas episodes, and he was only sort of a a side character in this one, right? So a bit of a disappointment there, but yeah, definitely a terrific episode.
So we're getting near the end here. What's number 4?
Okay, number 4. And I thought this would go quicker because I thought we'd have like episodes in common, but that has not been the case, has it?
It's been awesome.
At number 4, I've got It's a Pokenberry Christmas, part 1 and 2. Okay, yeah, I'm not sure what to make of that. I'm kind of worried that
it's not on my list. I'll say that.
Oh wow! Okay, wow. Okay, that very surprising once again. So I don't think I thought much of it when I first heard it. I wonder if I thought the thing sounded too fantastical for Odyssey. I'm not sure I would have bought this storyline today that George Barkley hits his head and then the entire episode basically is a dream sequence. Like, that's a little bit too fantastical for me. It seemed a little bit out of place for Odyssey at the time. And I think it just goes to show that things that feel out of place for Odyssey can age well as long as the story's good and the comedy's good. And I think it's just such a funny episode. I think the story's great because the original movie's great. And it's basically practically a condensed, abridged word for word, like it's this weird sort of like it's so close to the movie because it's taking so many lines of dialogue. Like every 10 seconds there's a bit of dialogue from the movie, and you don't realize that until you actually watch the movie and you're like, oh, this is practically the movie right here. But just like the movie, I think the ending's powerful. I think what's interesting for me is the fact that as the show progressed, George Barkley basically became the most interesting character in the family. And I feel like with other families in Odyssey, like the parents become less and less sort of prominent. And so I can't imagine the show today focusing an entire 2-parter on the father of a family, right? Like I can't picture the having a 2-part episode focused on Mr. Parker, right?
Yeah.
Or Mr. Perkins.
Mr. Perkins.
I mean, maybe Ed Washington.
When you're talking about that, I was trying to think, like, what's the dads on the show? Like, I think an episode that takes place where Ron Perkins is situated, like, pretty much the entire episode there, and maybe hear just a little bit of his family on the video calls would be really interesting. I wonder if Marshall will do that in the future.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, we'll see. But I can't picture them sort of making the father sort of the main character and devoting this entire 2-parter to that character. And he does a great job. And George Barkley is one of the best characters on Odyssey, and I think this episode really proves that. Mm-hmm. So why wasn't this episode on your top 10 list?
Well, there's so many episodes to choose from. I had to make it's like in the middle. It's not my least favorite. It's not my favorite. It's like kind of in the middle there. So it didn't quite make the cut. I'm not quite sure where I would rank it with like all the Christmas episodes. I think there is a lot of fun about it, and I think whether you're familiar with It's a Wonderful Life or not, it's a great continuation, or kind of like a wrap up, really, because you don't really hear much from the Barkleys at all, or at least that there's ministry in Pokeberry Falls after this. It's kind of like a bookend on that, because we heard them in Pokeberry Falls RFD, and about George's his going through seminary and that kind of stuff before. You see him at his lowest, and then when he comes up from that, he's gonna be okay, they're gonna be okay. And really, I don't think I picked this up as a kid, but like things like suicide wasn't really things that I was familiar with, as a kid. And they don't say the word in it, but they kind of reference it. And think back now, like, wow, that got kind of dark a little bit. Them kind of hinting at it, of what he was maybe thinking of doing. I think the music is probably one of the best things about those 2 parts. The music is absolutely phenomenal, and I think the acting is really good throughout. And again, as a kid, it's like it seems kind of off a little bit, but as long as you're invested in the character of the Barkleys beforehand, I think the episode works really well.
Yeah, and I like the fact that this episode is basically like 10 years in the making, because they named obviously like the characters after the characters in It's a Wonderful Life, right? So for people who don't know, George and Mary Barkley were sort of named after George and Mary Bailey from the movie, right? And Jimmy and Donna were named after Jimmy Stewart and Donna Reed, right? Who played those characters. And then Stewart Reed was, taken from those names as well. And it's just interesting that they started the show with these references to these characters, to It's a Wonderful Life. And that was the only similarity between the characters, right? Like, it's not like when they were introduced in Family Vacation, they had any similarity to the characters in It's a Wonderful Life. So it was like basically 10 years of foreshadowing to have the final Barkley episode, not counting Living in the Gray, to be that actual like It's a Wonderful Life connection. And I think that's really fascinating to me. Like,
very poetic.
Yeah, it's really interesting that they actually decided. I doubt they had this plan from the start, but it's just so fitting that, well, we've already got the references in the show. We might as well do a complete parody of the actual movie. So I always like that, and it always seemed like a nice ending for that family. So it sort of completes their story.
Yeah. And it ends with the people singing, but this one is people singing badly.
Yeah, which is interesting because it's like the second Christmas episode after Peace on Earth, which has Whit and Eugene showing up with presents.
Oh yeah, it is. Yeah, because I think Peace on Earth was actually supposed to be kind of like It's a Wonderful Life. I read in the guide. I think I read in the official guide that they had that, so it is kind of a copy of it. But I think this works. I think that's me. I don't know. I think like the way Peace on Earth ends a little bit better than I think this episode ends.
Right. So I guess they were making those references early on, but I guess obviously not as obvious as this episode. But yeah, that's my number 4.
Well, my number 4 is probably a really big departure from what your pick was, and my number 4 is A Christmas Conundrum. Was that a surprise to you as well?
Actually, no. I think I thought that was going to be on your list.
Well, I do have to say, if you all listening haven't heard it yet, you need to go listen to Michael LaFavor and Roy's review for this episode on AIO Audio News. I'll try to remember to put a link to it in the podcast notes. But they bring out so many things about the episode that I didn't really realize as much before, and after them reviewing it, I like the episode so much more. It's kind of a simple episode. It has pretty much all the major characters in it. The only other character that we have that's a new character is Grady, and he's used in the episode very, very well to make, the whole story come together, or kind of like, I guess, kind of bookends a little bit. But it's a simple story. It's just like, it's the best, comedy is usually, miscommunication and misunderstandings. And that's what this is. And it just kind of spirals. And because they keep it just like these 4 characters, and also, I think this is the first Christmas episode on the show with Eugene coming back to the show. So it's fun hearing him, interacting with the characters again around the holidays. And I think everybody is punching character, and it's kind of fun to see, like, with Whit, like, him trying to be, like you talked about, like, him being kind of sneaky, and, like, him trying to get the information out of Tom, like, he's not good at doing that kind of stuff. And, just the small inclusion of, like, with Bart Rathbone, is fun, too, and it's a kind of a simple story, really, but because we enjoy these characters so much, and like the dialogue, I think it's snappy. It's not cynical. Some Odyssey episodes, some of the humor can seem kind of a little bit cynical, but I think this is very, gentle, mellow humor, and humor I think that works with the characters' personalities and their traits, the way they act like fools for each other sometimes. And you're wondering, like, okay, how is this all gonna turn out? It builds to this, like, okay, they all expect this. How are they gonna react to when they don't get it? And it's just fun to see. And just I love the mustache trimmer joke where they keep mentioning it, and Connie just could not keep a secret. Don't tell Connie anything. No wonder nobody. She's always the last to know everything because people know that she'll spill the beans. But it's so much fun, and also it shows how like Wit, and he is wealthy, and he does care enough about Connie to do something so big as, buying her a car. And I'm sure he'd do that for anybody else too. But, she really needed it. And the way the episode ends, like, you have that scene with all them together where they're like, oh yeah, it's not important, all the presents and everything, it's the thought behind it, the sentiment behind it, that kind of stuff. And the episode could end there, but it doesn't. It has Eugene walking home, talking to Grady, and and it's an opportunity for Eugene to practice what he learned. They usually end in an episode where after they just learn something, and we don't usually see them act that out much. With this, you see, okay, he did learn his lesson. He gave up something that meant a good amount to him, like he really wanted. It's a scene that makes the episode even more heartwarming, and most of it's pretty funny, but it's at the point like this point that it still works. It doesn't stick out. It makes sense with the way the whole episode turned out, and that's why I really like it.
Interesting. I like the episode. I think it's probably one of the better modern day Christmas episodes. I don't know if I agree with you that it's a simple story. It's not on my top 10 list.
Wow.
The reason it's not on my list is because I'm always completely lost by the end of the episode. I'm completely lost about who owes who a present, and who thought who was going to get them a present, and which present the person got that person. And so I enjoy the first 3/4 of the episode, but it's not one that I can passively listen to, because if you ask me now, I could not tell you who. Like I couldn't summarize the plot of the story to you. But I'm glad you can understand the story, because I can't. But I agree with all your other points. It's nice to have these characters just, they take the 4 main characters and just have them open presents and have there be a miscommunication. I sort of wish they had done more episodes like this with our main characters. But aside from me just not being able to actually follow the episode, I don't have any complaints about it. Obviously, that's a big part of my enjoyment of the episode, if I can understand it. Maybe the only thing I thought was silly about the episode was that Connie thought that Eugene was going to buy her a car. I mean, they bicker all the time. She obviously knows that she probably has an understanding of his income, and the fact that he doesn't have a great job. It doesn't really make sense why Eugene, who's married, would buy his coworker, who would buy Connie a brand new car. Something seems a little off about that. It doesn't make much sense why she assumed that. But aside from that, I think it's a solid episode.
As Polhouse said, I think talking to Connie, like more than anybody about feelings don't always make sense or something like that. I can't remember the quote now. I think it's in a Penny Save that he talks about it. But yeah. Connie in this, and sometimes she's portrayed as way too much like how she was before years and years ago. But I think with this, I think it's a nice mix where it's not too overboard. It's still fitting with her character, but not too, I think, an extreme like some newer episodes have. Okay, here we go. Top 3. What's number 3 for you?
All right. So at number 3, I've got Back to Bethlehem.
Okay.
1 to 3. I think it's just a classic episode. I think it's just obviously one of the best Imagination Station episodes, one of the best Christmas episodes, sort of one of the best Connie and Eugene episodes as well. And kind of the opposite of what I was saying about The Star. Or if The Star is good because it sort of pays more attention to the story, or to the Christmas story, then this one is good because it doesn't pay that much attention to the Christmas story. You know what I mean? Like it has all these sort of subplots and stuff, and these storylines, and it has all these characters that weren't in the Bible and stuff. It feels like this sort of fresh retelling of the Christmas story through these different perspectives that we've never heard before. You know what I mean? And so, I mean, the entire third part of the episode is sort of this storyline with the zealot played by Richard Maxwell's character or actor. And you kind of completely forget about the Christmas story for a while, right? Because people are so familiar with the Christmas story, it's basically spending most of its running time just doing all these other interesting things, but having the Christmas story be sort of in the background of all these other things. So it just feels like it's a classic, and I think it's a classic for that reason, and that's because it feels like this very original piece of entertainment, right? So yeah, Back to Bethlehem number 3, and I feel like I had to have it on my list too because I think if you were to ask most Odyssey fans what's like the best Christmas Odyssey episode, I would say Back to Bethlehem would end up being number 1 or number 2. It's that much of a classic, and for a good reason.
Yeah. I don't think I thought too much about it before. Like, it doesn't spend the whole time with, like, with the main parts of the Christmas story that we're aware of, but at the same time not going too far over, like, where it's minimized. I think I mentioned on the podcast before about a book series that a few books I've read, the Imagine series for kids, where it's like different kids going back in time to the Bible times. But I found with the 2 or 3 books I've read that the Bible story is very, very, like, the main Bible story is very minimized, and it's basically things that happen around that or things that aren't in the Bible story, and it's almost like, wait, this story could almost be any other kind of story. Like, it could be almost in any time of history, or just totally fictional. And I think that's for biblical fiction, that kind of stuff. I think that rubs me the wrong way because I'm expecting something a little more concrete of like the original Bible story. But with this one, I'd never really thought about it until you mentioned it. How much, I mean, it is a 3-parter. I think it's the very first 3-parter on Odyssey. And if they didn't have all these side stuff, it probably would just be like a 1 or 2-part episode. But because we have all these character interactions, like with Connie and Eugene, and with at the beginning and the end, and you have such well-written these side characters and characters that could have been there, I mean, it just makes it so interesting. Like you said, like a fresh take on the story, and it's also, I believe, this episode was based on a stage play script that Paul McCusker wrote, which I think I haven't read it, but I think from what I know about it, I'm assuming it's probably pretty similar, except for like the Odyssey connection. So it'd be interesting to read that too. So number 3 on my list is Silent Night. It's interesting. I have Silent Night and Christmas Conundrum. They both come in the same album, which is kind of interesting. They had 2 in the same album. And it seems like is it like 2 Christmases? Is it the same Christmas time? It doesn't seem like it's the same Christmas, but you have like almost like a year between the episodes if you think about Odyssey time. But anyway, moving on from that, I think this episode, it's the feeling of it. It feels like a very nostalgic episode. It's very different than most episodes. It's carried a lot by Paul Herlinger. I think it's one of his best performances, and it's a great way to show Whit by himself. You don't usually get to see Whit much by himself, and the premise for the show that John Fornoff used, I think a fan had mentioned in the past, like, hey, you should do an Odyssey episode where Whit is all alone for Christmas, and I think it's a great way to see it. And what else, like, if at his age, he'd be thinking about past Christmases, and I think it works great. We get a lot of great flashbacks to his past and some events that we didn't see, like, when they got the news, or like right soon after they got the news, like Jerry passed away and stuff like that. And it's these sweet, really sweet moments. We also have the inclusion of Lester in there, which I love Lester. Every episode he was in, I think he was very well utilized, and I wish they had done at least a couple more episodes with him. And the older I get, I think this episode gets better because the older I get, I think I have more Christmases to look back on, and think about people have passed away, like my grandma passed away this year, and I've had a great grandpa pass away several years ago, and thinking back these times, like, with people that aren't here anymore or you can't be with, is something that I can kind of relate to a little bit more, even though I've never spent a Christmas alone yet, thank the Lord. It's something I think that gets better with age, at least for me. Like, it gets better with my age, I guess I should say. But I think it's a very sweet story, and I like the music with it, and I just like the ending that Whit does get to spend Christmas with someone. He's able to help Lester out. Lester, he's most people don't treat him well. They don't spend much time with him or anything like that. And he had this, this relationship that you've had back, like, in No Way Out, No Way In. And I don't think much about this before, but if Whit had gone on his normal plans, he would have been able to make Lester's Christmas all the better. And it's kind of thinking, like, the things, the inconveniences that we have that happen to us, what is God trying to make things happen? How is God going to use us to do things for other people or to work on ourselves that we wouldn't choose ourselves to do, but that he sets it up for us to do? And I guess I could keep talking about that, but I just really enjoy this episode.
Yeah, I agree. It's a good episode. I like the fact that that year listeners got 2 Christmas episodes. In some ways, I think that should happen every year.
Amen.
Right?
Well, we kind of did in the first club season. Well, the first club season, we had I think The Perfect Gift, and I don't really consider it a Christmas episode much, but it has some Christmas elements with All by Myself.
Yeah, that's true. I actually hadn't thought of that, and we actually got it again this year, right? When listeners in the club got to listen to the Christmas bells, and then like a few weeks later, we got the one with Wooten and Penny, right?
Oh yeah, I didn't think about that.
Yeah. So and then also Monty's Christmas with the Reluctant Rival, and then Silent Night and Christmas Conundrum. I think it's it's always great, and I think in this case it's nice that it's just they're 2 completely different episodes. I think there's a logical reason why I feel like a Christmas Conundrum is not happening Christmas Day, right? It's happening before Christmas. Is that right?
Yeah, I believe so. It happens on Christmas Day with the gift exchange, I think.
Oh,
or the day before.
Because I think there's some logical explanation why. Like I don't think they're meant to both happen on Christmas. I think one is supposed to be like a traditional. I'm gonna have to listen again, but I remember thinking that there was a logical explanation why it made sense that these two episodes weren't actually happening on Christmas, But I'll have to listen to it again. But yeah, I just like the fact that you have one episode that's sort of a comedy and sort of chaotic, and then you're sort of given this very sort of quiet and contemplative episode that's very different. It's not on my top 10, but I think it's a solid episode. Yeah, I like the fact that I think when that episode came out, I think it had been quite a while since we heard from young Wit. And so I think at the time it was just sort of nice to sort of hear him again.
And Jana.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't remember whether Jana was played by that same actress before that episode.
Yeah, it's the same actress.
Was she?
DJ Harner, I think.
Okay. So what was the time before then? Was it the Triangle?
Wait, are you thinking of Jenny or Jana? Because Jana wasn't in the Triangle. That was Jenny, Wit's wife. Because I think Jana was last in like Monty's Christmas or something like that.
Yeah, I'm getting them confused then. But yeah, it was just nice to sort of hear from these actors again. And not on my top 10, but I think it's the only reason for that is I wonder if I found it a little bit less involving than I remembered it. But still very, very very solid episode.
Well, I guess you bring out a good point. I guess this episode has a more simple story than Christmas Conundrum has.
Yeah, that's true though. Absolutely. At least I can follow this one. But for some reason, I can't. I can't follow Christmas Conundrum. Maybe one day.
Okay, so number 2, what's on your list?
Number two, I've got Unto Us a Child is Born. I'm glad we have another one in common here. We've basically talked about all the points I was going to mention. It's a great episode. Like you said, it's great that sort of continuing these 2 storylines of sort of Mary Barclay's pregnancy and Eugene and Katrina's relationship, and sort of puts them together in one episode. And yeah, I just think it's a classic. It's a really fun episode.
Yeah, nice. Get close to an agreement on that one with the numbers on that. So, number 2 on my list is Gifts for Imagine Guy. So, I guess I probably should have added this disclaimer at the beginning of this podcast, but I've actually done 2 recordings of me doing my top 10 favorite Christmas Odyssey episodes. I did it for the AIO blogcast several years ago, and I did it for the YouTube channel for Odyssey Geek 3 or 4 years ago. I think both of those times, I haven't listened or watched that in quite a while. I wanted to make sure this is favorite episodes that how I'm feeling now more than anything. But I believe both of those I had Gifts from Imagine Guy as my number 1 favorite Odyssey episode. It's actually fallen down a little bit, but that still it still is like for the very first Christmas episode of Odyssey. I think they did so many good things right with it. They have the main characters that we've heard so far. Wit, Connie, and Tom, and at this point, I can't remember how many episodes Officer Harley's been in, which I'm so glad that this episode was not made a lost episode. That would have been a tragedy. This episode, for the first time doing a story, it's kind of a simple problem, kind of like around the holidays, and it's a time for Wit. I think so. Let's see. I think this came after A Tangled Web, if I'm not mistaken. So this is like. Oh yeah, and also after Lights Out at Wit's End. So this is like, Wit's his telling of stories in his own way, kind of like he does later with like By Faith Noah, and kind of like with also like Return to the Bible Room, and this I think this kind of solidifies Wit's storytelling capabilities and how other actors for Wit would do in the future. But this one I think it's so off the walls. Crazy humor, and the humor they have, probably my favorite kind of humor is this kind of humor, and it, like fourth wall breaking, talking to the narrator, just poking fun at these different tropes and that kind of stuff. I love that kind of stuff, and I've heard this episode so many times. We've heard this in our family so many times that it's probably the most quoted Odyssey episode ever. I remember one time on a school field trip, me and my sister, we tried to quote the entire story of Gifts from Magic Guy. And we got pretty close to like all the episode lines, and it's one of those episodes. Even now, if we listen to it together, for a while, I was like, okay, I want to listen to the episode, but I don't want to quote anything. I just want to listen to the episode. But I guess it got kind of tiresome. But the last time I heard it with my sister, like we quoted quite a bit of it, and it's just so much fun. And I love the sequel they did in BTV Idolatry. I think it's really great how they did that, and does so much with the characters, but still feeling like it could have happened like years ago earlier on the show. And it's also a really nice ending. I think there's some probably better endings for future Christmas Odyssey episodes, but just Wit's kind of his little monologue there about the star and all that, and then Hal Smith's delivery with that, it's just beautiful. I think maybe the singing, I don't know, it's kind of cliche. I mean, again, this was years ago. We've heard lots of episodes since then and other Christmas stories. It's cool hearing all the characters sing at the end, and it kind of like echoing and then fading out. I like that transition with it. But this episode, I think hits the funny bone. It hits the heart, and it does a great job of being a high bar for what Christmas episodes in the Odyssey, in the future of Odyssey, would be.
I agree. It's a great episode. It's I guess I would consider it a classic. Obviously, great dialogue. Clever lines, and sort of just nonstop funny line after funny line. It's funny, I was actually talking to someone about the fact that I was making this Christmas top 10 Christmas list, and I had mentioned to them, I was going through which episodes I was considering for my top 10, and I mentioned that I was considering Gifts of Magic Guy for the top 10, and the response was, nah, the story was done better by Jungle Jam.
I would disagree with that. This was closer to the original story.
I have not heard the episode, but I just thought I have not heard the Jungle Jam episode, but I just thought I would get your response to that. But you don't think so, huh?
Well, it's great for a Jungle Jam episode. Like the episode's called The Gift of the Razzleflabbin, I think, and it's kind of like where we have this, we give it up to each other and all that, and I think it works better with it not being characters from the show it happening to. It's like kind of like the first introduction to, like, I'm sure myself and others, this was the first introduction to a lot of O. Henry's stories, or just like any of his stories with this. And I think it works better with the humor the way it is on its own, where Jungle Jam is kind of like that all the episodes. The kind of humor they have with the way they tell the story in this, it wouldn't work for every episode of Odyssey, but it works well for pretty much every episode of Jungle Jam. So I think it's a good episode. For Jungle Jam, I think the story works better on its own rather than someone retelling it, rather than having it played out by the actual characters.
Interesting.
Okay, so here we go. Actually, here let's do something fun here. Let's see if we can predict what our number ones will be. So I think probably for you, number one would probably be. Mm, this is gonna be hard. I should have thought more about this first. um, I would say maybe. Well, I know it's not Grandma's Christmas Visit. I'll just say that.
It is not.
So I'm probably I'll just go ahead and say you'll yeah. I think probably your favorite's probably gonna be Peace on Earth. So what do you think my favorite's gonna be?
That's tough because you're sort of this interesting, or you're kind of a unique Odyssey fan.
Well, thank you.
Because in some ways you have an appreciation for the older episodes, but you also have sort of, I would say, a stronger appreciation for the sort of the album 43 to like, or 42 to like 50 era. I think you have a stronger appreciation for those episodes than I do. So on the one hand, I want to say Back to Bethlehem because that's the episode that is more universally liked. But I also want to say A Lamb's Tale because you have an appreciation for episodes from that era. So I don't know which one to guess, but am I right in assuming it's one of those two?
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna go with A Lamb's Tale.
Okay. So go ahead. I want to find out if I'm right or wrong on your number one.
My number one is an episode that's basically been my favorite Christmas Odyssey episode basically forever, and every time I listen to it, it does not get old. It just sort of confirms the fact that this is not only the best Christmas episode, but I think one of the greatest Odyssey episodes of all time, and that is Peace on Earth.
I was right. Wow.
Yeah, you were right. Yeah, so I think there's so many reasons I like it. I think maybe it's just nostalgia. I think what I like about it is that the episode shouldn't work. Like if it had been released today, over these over analytical fans online would be saying, "Oh, you can't structure a story like this. You can't have one half, be this one story at wit's end, and then the second half be the story at the Barclays, like and with two different settings and two different stories, people would say it was sort of like combined in sort of a messy way or something like that. These two stories, and I just think both stories work really well in illustrating the theme. There's so many great moments, like Whit inviting Eugene to stay with him after he finds out that Eugene's going to be by himself, or Whit and Eugene visiting the Barclays, or Tom trying to get Whit to enjoy the silence, or at the end when Whit whistles and we hear Eugene's keys, and then when like Lightning Livingston and Officer David Harley show up at the end. It just has this great Christmas feel, and I feel like this is just a recipe for how to create the perfect Odyssey Christmas episode. You just need to have sort of a simple story. It doesn't have to be the funniest or the most emotional or the most dramatic. It just needs to have nice moments between the show's main characters. That's why I think some episodes of Odyssey don't work as Christmas episodes, like All by Myself, or I can't think of any other episodes right now.
Grandma's Christmas Visit.
Yeah, but like in the case of All by Myself, it's like you don't actually have any of the characters interacting with each other, which obviously is the point of the story, right? To have the characters by themselves isolated. You want to hear your favorite characters basically having the sort of Christmas that you have, or the sort of Christmas that you want to have. It's, yeah, like I said, it's a great episode. It's just my favorite. Probably a top 10 Odyssey episode of all time. Yeah, Peace on Earth.
Yeah, and that's one I've heard quite often too, and I think it's the third Christmas Odyssey episode if you count the day after Christmas, and I do like it's one of the few times I think after like maybe like a member of the family where we see Whit being human, like has some flaws, and he too can be susceptible to some stuff that we run into, like being like too busy and that kind of stuff. And again, it's also a chance for I think it's the first episode after Connie Part 2 as well. So it's the first interaction we see with the other characters as a Christian, like with Eugene and talking about that. And so it's also one of the first times. Well, I guess it is it's actually the second or third episode with Eugene in it. So it's the first time we hear, I guess, a heart to heart, or it's kind of a little bit of a breaking down, or at least more people reaching out to him. Like he's very, computer minded, very, very, set in his ways kind of thing. And we kind of get that a little bit at part 2 of Connie, when like, Whit talks about like, how the computer system was all that, and how he wanted, there's no heart in it, that kind of stuff. But this one, I think it shows a little bit like, with Whit or Eugene, look at the displays and that kind of stuff. And we see that later, like in Back to Bethlehem, and I guess The Star too. And if you think about it, the Christmas episodes with Eugene in it are some of the most. These episodes with Eugene in the Christmas episodes are very important to his character, and you see this for the first time in this episode. And like you said, like it's really clever. Like you can't really tell unless you're like picking it apart. You can't really tell that it's switching over, because when we have like with Jimmy in the first scene with his Christmas list or whatever, and then Whit invited him to come to the Barclays, then we hear it with the Barclays, and then it just goes with the Barclays, and you have the Eugene and Whit near the end. Like it's kind of blink and you miss it, and it's very clever storytelling, very unique way of telling two different stories, rather than having like the first scene of the episode at Whit's End, then second scene with the Barclays, and then third scene at Whit's End, and fourth scene at the Barclays, that kind of thing. I think it's a really great way to do the story, and also showing like Tom how much of a friend he is to Whit, that he's able to see, okay, I need to say something here, John Avery. And it's a great first time, I think, really seeing his friendship and the way they react to each other when they see one of them is not responding the way they should. Yeah, it is a good episode. It's not on my top 10, but I think it still is a good episode. All right, so number 1 for me is actually gonna be, well, I guess I would consider both the episodes you guess as classic episodes, but this is a classic. So my number 1 is Back to Bethlehem.
Oh, okay. I picked the wrong one.
Well, you're close. So Back to Bethlehem, I think, has always been in my top 10, really. I think all the lists I did had Back to Bethlehem in it, but I've noticed I've listened to this episode probably more than any other Christmas episode, or Christmas episodes, I guess, because it's 3-parter. I actually had this as part of my nighttime listening playlist for quite a while, so I would hear this episode quite often at night, going to bed, and wake up in the middle of the night and hearing parts of it and that kind of stuff. And usually those kind of episodes are ones that if it's an episode I can listen to over and over and over again without getting really tired of it, I think that stands out as being a really good episode. And also like some of the moments that happen, like with Eugene and Hezekiah, like with his moments with him. Again, another great Eugene moment that's, flashbacks to this episode happen quite a bit in future episodes, or at least a couple times, I think. And, it's just kind of funny seeing someone fall in love with Connie, and she doesn't really want, well, actually, I guess 2 people, and seeing how she reacts to all of them. And I think about it's a little more comical Christmas story, like of the nativity, than probably we're also used to, the way like the innkeeper is. He's very humorous, and it's not to the level of BTV, which I'm glad they didn't, and it's not to the level like by Faith Noah. I think it's a good balance with that. Like we talked about, it's a fresh take on the story, and I think just the dialogue just works really well, and we get to see these characters that we've grown to know and love for about nine albums so far, and seeing how they react. And just the moment at the end where it just ends and Eugene crying, that's just such a beautiful moment. And then with Hal Smith as Whit, reading, I think, from Isaiah about, unto us a child is born, and him like kind of looking at the camera, or like just talking into the microphone directly to the audience or whatever, and saying, like, I think he said like "Merry Christmas, everyone" or something like that. It's just I think it's a perfect ending for a Christmas episode, and it's a way to just experience the nativity story in a different way. And it's one I don't think it ever gets old either. So that's number 1.
Yeah, I like the fact that, I mean, obviously the scene between Hezekiah and Eugene is sort of made more iconic by the fact that that scene is sort of played over and over and over again throughout the show, sort of made that even, I like that, right? Like, I like the fact that an episode can become better because of what happens on the show later on. And that's sort of I feel like that's an example of that. I also like the fact that during this time they more often just reuse the same actors who played sort of well-known characters on Odyssey to play Imagination Station characters. So like nowadays they have sort of these separate actors who just sound like who are more suited for these Old Testament characters or New Testament characters or historical figures that you don't hear in sort of everyday Odyssey. I'm trying to think of some actors' names. I mean, the guy who was in Buried Sin, he played quite a few historical figures too, right?
Matt Hurwitz.
Maybe I'm thinking of someone else.
Or are you thinking Pete Renaday?
Yeah, that is who I'm thinking of. Yeah, so there are some of these actors who play almost like exclusively these Old Testament, New Testament historical characters. But then back then, they were just reusing the same actors who were more well known for these other characters. So like in Back to Bethlehem, you've got Dr. Blackard and George Barkley and Richard Maxwell and Uncle Joe. I'm not sure if Uncle Joe was introduced at that point yet.
I don't think so, but we have Connie's mom too.
That's right. Yeah, I knew her voice sounded familiar. I didn't, but that's the thing. It's that when you heard it at the time, they just became different characters. You weren't bothered by it, and I think listeners nowadays are just more. They were just they're more easily distracted by that, I think.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah, so I remember that there's a new Imagination Station.
Oh, Worth It?
No, with the story of David.
Oh yeah, David and Absalom.
Yeah, so in that episode you've got Andrei Stoica, who plays Wit, I think, in that episode, but then also plays a character inside that story, right? And that's distracting, because you're like, no, I just heard you as Wit, or you're the person who plays Wit normally, and I just don't know why this is, but for some reason back during this time, you just don't think of as soon as they play a different character in Back to Bethlehem or Bernard and Esther or any of these episodes, you're not thinking, oh, this is just Dr. Blackard, how distracting, or this is just, yeah, like I said, Richard Maxwell or any of these characters. You thought of them as different characters. So I think that's really interesting. And in some ways, it kind of makes the episode really special too, because there's that element that there are just so many great actors doing these roles too. So anyway, that's just sort of something that I thought was really interesting when I re-listened to it, that you kind of can forget that these actors are so good that it sort of makes you forget that they're known for more famous roles, right?
Yeah. So do you have time to tell us what the rest of your rankings were for the rest of the Odyssey Christmas episodes?
I mean, we are past 2 hours, but I can I can try to. I can say a couple of honorable mentions, because I feel
okay,
like
that's fine.
The second half is sort of not exactly in an order. But I do have sort of as honorable mentions. I have A Lamb's Tale as an honorable mention, and I didn't end up putting on the list, even though I used to like it quite a bit. And I didn't put it on the list because I realized that I actually only liked the episode because of one storyline, and that's the Nick Mulligan storyline, whereas everything else is sort of like, is just sort of so-so. The Visitors at number 12. The Living Nativity, I was kind of expecting to talk about that episode today, because there are lots of things I like about that episode. Gifts of Magin Guy. I've got Silent Night here. So yeah, those are a few honorable mentions, and I think towards the end of my list, I've got episodes like maybe The Day After Christmas is not a great episode, I don't think.
Agreed.
Not one of my favorite episodes. Grandma's Christmas Visit, not one of my favorite Christmas episodes.
Same.
All by Myself, not a Christmas episode, and the problem with that one is that I don't think it actually tries to be much of a it doesn't give much effort into trying to be a Christmas episode.
Yeah.
It sort of mentions Christmas halfway once halfway, and then again at the end. So yeah, those are that's pretty much what I have listed.
Yeah, A Lamb's Tale, I know that one got pretty close to being on my top 10 list. That was a little bit difficult to keep off of it. Like you said, like with Grandma's Christmas Visit and The Day After Christmas, those are probably my least favorite. And I've only heard If I Never Told You Once, so I need to listen to that again to see how I really feel about that. I think I like that episode better than All By Myself, but I'm not quite sure where I'd rank it in comparison to the other Odyssey episodes.
Yeah, it's I just listened to that one again this afternoon. It's not bad. It's definitely not top 15, but it's not like it's not towards the end of the list either. So maybe somewhere halfway or something like that.
Yeah, maybe I'll do another top 10 Christmas Odyssey episode 10 years in the future, and maybe it'll be on there, or maybe this will be completely different. Who knows?
You didn't include Christmas Bells though, did you?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
That one, yeah, like I said, I consider it a Christmas episode to a certain extent, but it's not the kind of Christmas episodes I usually like or ones I like to listen to a lot, even though I think it's a really good episode overall, but it didn't make the list. I actually knocked that one off pretty quickly. That wasn't going to be my top 10. Just because these other episodes are ones that I think are more enjoyable as a Christmas episode. Well, this was a lot of fun, Ben. It was great to get you back on the podcast again and discuss all these great episodes. And thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me again. I have to say this was a much tougher assignment than last time. I'm glad that I did it. Because I got to actually revisit episodes I hadn't heard of in a while, and now I feel like I'm going to be revisiting them a lot more in the future. So yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and hopefully that's the same for the listeners too. Go back and re-listen to some of these episodes that you have not heard in a while, and as I say many times on the podcast, listen to an episode at least 2 times to get a better formed opinion on it. So thanks again, Ben.
All right, you're welcome.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation. I had a lot of fun doing it. And like I said before, it was great getting Ben back on the podcast here. So, a little bit of housekeeping here before I sign off. This will be the last full regular episode of Odyssey Geek this year. There may be another Beyond AIO episode coming out before the end of the year, but that's all up in the air. I actually have 3 of those already recorded, 1 partially edited, but we'll see if I can get one of those out before the end of the year. And a little heads up, next year, probably episode number 20, I'll be releasing a special episode with 2 guest hosts. In that episode, we talk about our top 5 favorite Odyssey albums. You don't want to miss it. In the meantime, why don't you tell me what your favorite Christmas Odyssey episodes are? Was there some that you think that Ben and I should have added to our list? Let me know by contacting me at odysseygeek@gmail.com. You can also message me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. In those places, you'll find me at Odyssey Geek. And if you've been listening a while, I'm sure you know how to spell it. That's ODYSSEYGEEK. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast app so you'll be the first to know when the next Beyond AO episode and the top 5 favorite Odyssey albums episode comes out. And while you're at it, why not tell a friend about the show? If they're Odyssey Geeks as well, they're going to enjoy this podcast as much as you. Lastly, I just want to say a big thank you to everybody that's listened to the podcast throughout 2021. There were so many more listeners to the podcast this year. The podcast as a whole has reached over 5,000 listens. That's just incredible. Thank you guys so much for doing that. It's been my pleasure to bring this podcast to you, and I'm looking forward to sending you more great content in the new year. So until next time, Merry Christmas to you all. I hope it's the best one you've ever had.